Hey guys, this is Dean Green. I'm just checking in to say hi and get you guys started. I'm going to do the intro for today. You're in Chapter 7, Section 1. It's all about Greece. Get ready. Here we go.
All right, guys, so today we're going to be talking about the geography of ancient Greece. And Greece was actually was the first civilization on the continent of Europe. So as you can see, there's Greece with our little arrow there, and then that arrow points to overall the continent of Europe. Okay, now compared to the other civilizations we've talked about, with the exception of the Israelites, this was the first one we see where the civilization starts in a very mountainous area. That's what makes this place very unique. So the mainland of Greece is actually a peninsula, and we know that a peninsula is an area of land surrounded on three sides by water. So here's Greece, right? And then we have water here, here, and here. So that's what makes this area a peninsula. So as I just said, we know that the geography of Greece was rocky and mountainous. So this, as you can see on the map, this is actually the mainland of Greece. And if you look at this map, look at all of that mountainous area. That is a lot. Okay, and what do we know? When there are mountains, this forces people to settle in certain areas, right? So the people settled in flat areas along the coast, and in some cases there were river valleys that they could settle along. So they would try, see this area right here? They would try to find some area that was flat that they could settle, and that led them to settle along the sea and the coastline. Now, because people were settling along the coastline, this made for fishing, trading, and shipbuilding as jobs. A lot of people decided that that was how they could make money. They would fish, they would trade, and they would build ships to help their family because there was very limited farming. Now, with this mountainous area, that made certain people feel very isolated. Okay, so this is a big theme with ancient Greece, isolation. So when they're here up in these mountains, you know, imagine someone settling along here, and then there are other people over here. They're isolated from those people along the coast. So with this isolation, that led to Greek communities creating separate city-states. Now, because they didn't have, you know, access to the sea, they felt isolated and left out. So some of these people in this area over here, they're like, you know what? We're not part of this community down here, so we're going to create our own city-state. And there was no central government at the time, so they started coming up with their own ideas of what government looked like, but Ms. Todrick will get to those points later. So that is the geography of ancient Greece. Let's keep on moving.
Okay guys, now we are going to cover the hot question. Your hot question states, how did the seas influence the way many Greeks lived? In order to answer this question, look above the box of the hot question. It says mountains and seas. Reread the information in the boxes. Pay attention to what the mainland of Greece is. Read the geography of Greece from the boxes. Your answer should be a minimum of 2 complete sentences. I know you guys can do this. We expect a lot out of you, and we know you can do it. The remainder of it says, the Greeks exchanged ideas with other cultures as they traveled the seas. This is an example of cultural diffusion, a word that we're all very familiar with and should know by heart now. Please.
All right, now that you kind of know the lay of the land and Miss Lewis has told you about the geography and how there's a lot of water and there's a lot of sailing that goes on, we kind of want to think about where might be the first place that they would have settled. And if you look at our map, it's going to be this island right here. That's going to be the island of Crete. And that's where we're going to see the first settlement that's going to pop up, moving away from Asia and Europe. So the first people group that we're going to look at is the Minoans. Now the Minoans are not really Greek yet. They are like the forefathers of being Greek. They're going to the Greek are going to copy a lot of customs from the Minoan, have a lot of things in common, but they're not yet Greek. So they're going to be based on this island of Crete. They're going to be the best shipbuilders of their time. And if you look where they're located, that makes perfect sense, because how would they be able to trade with anybody or go anywhere else if they are not good at building their ships and have solid transportation to leave the island? So the island of Crete is going to become a center of trade all throughout the region, and they're going to be very good at it. They are going to trade for cloth and pottery. They're going to trade cloth from Egypt. They're going to trade pottery from other places. From Cyprus, they're going to trade. They're going to get building materials from the Phoenicians, purple dye from the Phoenicians. So they are going to be in touch with a lot of different people around. It would be awesome if we could read their language and know more about what they had done, but we still don't understand their language yet, and they're still trying to decipher that, so we don't quite know everything about them. So what archaeologists and historians have done have taken their artifacts and put them together, primary sources, and tried to piece together what they think might have happened. So there's a lot of trading of wood and pottery. Now, we don't know exactly how this civilization ends either. It's possibly an earthquake, possibly an invasion. One cool story about the Minoans is they are built, the name of the city comes from King Minos, and said that he had a labyrinth and people would get lost in the labyrinth, and he put people in there and wander around for a long time, and that would be their punishment, and they would eventually die down in there because they couldn't get out. So there's a lot of cool stories that we're going to hear about these different peoples. We're going to talk more about these guys on Thursday, and so we can compare and contrast them. So after the Minoans were in charge, then we come into the Mycenaeans. Now the Mycenaeans, they're going to move a little further away, and they're going to start going on to the mainland of Greece. And they're going to settle there, and they're going to be different, but they're going to be a little the same. So we can see where Crete is here, and then from here they're going to settle up over that way. Okay, so my drawings are not that great getting there, but you can see where it's pointing with the star right there. So they're going to be the first Greeks, and they're going to speak the Greek language. They're going to build fortresses and palaces, and again, they're going to be excellent at trading, and we do see more of their language, and we're able to understand what they talked about. And so there's lots of good trading records. There's lots of sources where we can know what the Mycenaeans were thinking. They were very rich, and they built very high city walls, and some people said that the Cyclops must have helped them build those walls because they were so tall they couldn't have been built by humans. Somebody had to come help them build that. So there's just a lot of cool stories that we're going to get to talk about, and maybe if you guys can find a cool story for us, we would love to hear that and hear what you've got to find about the cool things, Greeks and goddesses and legends that come around with this civilization. Here's a picture of some of the walls and some of the cities you can see there. That is very, very intense building for this time period. You can see a lot of ruins that are left behind, and I know one of my kids has actually been to Greece, and so I was kind of jealous about that, but you can see a lot of cool things that go on. We don't know how this civilization ended either, but we do know that once both of these civilizations fell, that the Greeks quit keeping records, and so they entered into a period of time for about 400 years that we don't have any records. We don't have anything to go by, and so it's considered as dark ages of Greece a little bit because we don't know exactly what happened. So I think that was my last. Oh, I think that okay. So maybe they could have crumbled due to earthquakes and wars, but for whatever reason, when they did end, we don't know exactly what happened to them, but we do know that there are no more records, and we can't know what happened during that time period. All right, so let's keep moving on.
So Ms. Hodges just got done talking about, ancient Greece going through this dark time or the dark ages. Their population decreased. There was a lot of war. They had earthquakes. But around 700 BC, we see that Greece starts to recover from the dark ages, and they start to see a population increase. People were having babies, and they started having more people live there, and people were living. So as the population increased, certain things started to happen. Now, the rocky soil and the mountains meant that the limited farming they did have, those farmers couldn't support this giant population that was happening. So what happened was Greek communities, certain communities, decided they would send people to a different area and establish what's known as a colony. So a colony, in its true definition, is just a settlement in a new area that has close ties or loyalty to their homeland. So when they did this, when those colonies went out, it would increase trade with other nations. Now, the Greeks began to make metal coins, so instead of trading item to item, they would then have money being brought in. And as the wealth increased, there was a need for a new alphabet. So they were trading with all these other civilizations and excuse me, my mouth is so dry. They were trading with all these other civilizations and they were trying to keep track of everything, so they had to come up with a new alphabet. And that essentially made their own 24, right? It's 24 symbols, guys? Mm-hmm. Yes, 24 symbols of their alphabet. It was easier to understand, not just for themselves, but other countries as well.
So Miss Lewis talked about how isolated the Greek polises or city-states were. Okay, and a polis is a Greek city-state made up of the town, but also all the areas surrounding it. Okay, and because they were very isolated between the oceans everywhere on three sides, remember Greece is a peninsula, and all of the mountains all over Greece, people first thought of themselves as members of their polis rather than Greek, and they weren't really united as a country. Okay, you know, it reminds me of when we're all in different classrooms. Yes, we all go to Passetti Bay Middle School, but depending on what classroom you're in, you might have different rules you have to follow. You might approach things a little bit differently than the classroom down the hall. It's the same thing with the polises. Even though they were all considered Greek, they had different patron gods or gods that they would worship more than anybody else. They might speak the language a little bit differently from each other. They might have different customs, different foods they like to eat, and different ways of just approaching life in general. So this concept of being isolated, guys, is really important to understand. Later, we're going to see it's going to be very hard for the Greeks to unite together. And we're going to see them really live out that saying of united we stand, divided we fall. Although each polis was a little bit different, they did have some similarities. For example, they were both mostly surrounded by mountains and seas. And when we talk about our polises, we got to remember they were pretty small because these mountains and seas surrounded them. By 500 BC, so the end of the Dark Ages, nearly 300,000 people lived in the polis of Athens, but most were much smaller. 300,000 sounds like a lot, but it's really not that big. I mean, we have cities in our country that have millions of people in them. 300,000 is probably about the population of St. Augustine, maybe St. Johns County, okay? We have 1,500 kids just in our school alone. So most polises would not have a whole lot of people. So you would really get to know everyone. Now with this, there were some similarities. Almost every polis had an acropolis, and this is a fort built on the hilltop in the center of the polis. You would want to build your polis around this acropolis because that's the highest place in the surrounding area. You want to be able to see your enemies coming. So your acropolis is way up here in the highest area in town. So if your enemies came, one, you could see them coming, but two, you could run there and have a safe place to hide where your enemies wouldn't be able to get to you as easily. And so a lot of times you might see temples built up there, but mostly it's a fort. It's there to protect people. So that acropolis is there to protect. Now, we have another part of town that most polises or Greek city-states had, and that is the agora. Now, the agora is an open marketplace, so it's kind of just like a town center where people could debate issues, choose officials, pass laws, worship, shop, and they just kind of met together with their friends, and this is where the community would come together. Now, would this be a good place to hide if your enemies came? No, it's a big open area where there's a bunch of people all around and a bunch of open spaces, okay? Now, as we move forward, we're going to practice in class some different ways to remember the difference between an acropolis and an agora. And we've got some hand motions to do and some other things, but they require a little bit more space than we have here just on this little tiny, tiny video screen. So in class, we're going to practice more about that. But our agora, this is where we get the word agoraphobic. If somebody is afraid of big open spaces with lots of people and crowds, they're agoraphobic. So we get that word from the Greek agora, this open marketplace.
Okay, Greek citizenship. Today in the United States, a person who is born here is considered a citizen. Therefore, we as American citizens owe many of our ideas about citizenship to ancient Greece. So who was a Greek citizen? In ancient Greece, being born there didn't necessarily or automatically make you a citizen. A citizen was a member of a political community with rights and responsibilities. Greeks believed that the responsibility to run the city-state was theirs because the polis, which is a city-state or independent country, was made up of their property. Now take a look at the chart right below you. It says rights and responsibilities. Do you know the difference between these two terms? A right is a freedom that is protected and that you are born with or granted through citizenship. For example, freedom of speech. A responsibility is an obligation to do something. For example, doing your homework or doing your chores at home. In your column under rights in Greece, citizens had the right to vote, own property, and defend themselves in court. Do these sound familiar to any rights we have as American citizens today? Responsibilities for Greek citizens were to serve in government, fight for their polis or city-states as citizen soldiers. These citizen soldiers were called hoplites. Write this word on your packet by the word citizen soldiers right there. Write hoplite. It's spelled H-O-P-L-I-T-E-S. These soldiers fought on foot, carried a round shield, a short sword, and a spear. They marched together in a unified formation. This means kind of like they were all lined up as one, marching along. In most Greek city-states, let's just let that bounce out of the way. In most Greek city-states, only free land-owning men born in the polis, which is your city-state, could be citizens. Women and children had no rights at this time.